we just looked at. So if you look here, this is 300 Win Mag. It's 190 grain Sierra Match King. It's what the military currently use in the 2010. Decent bullet, 190 grains, pushes about 2950, somewhere in there, around there, okay? So I stacked these three together. The first one's a 6.5 Creedmoor. The second one's a 260 Remington, and the third one's a 308. If you look at the, don't look at the bullets real quick, but look at the casings, and look at all three casings have a cartridge overall length of 2.8 inches. So what does that mean? That means that all three of those bullets will fit into a magazine, into a 308 mag, okay? So when SOCOM changed from 308 to 6.5 Creedmoor, the reason we went to 6.5 Creedmoor and not 260 Remington, they're practically the same bullet. The problem is, if you look at the casing, it's a little shorter for 6.5 Creedmoor than it is for 260 Remington, which allows you to use longer bullets, which allows you to shoot. The bullet we actually picked was a 140 grain Berger hybrid. We tested every 6.5 bullet on the market. We took with a radar, I think we had 22 projectiles. We checked it on a Doppler radar for 2,000 meters for flight characteristics. And then we took the top 5 and we shot them at ballistic gel in a lab. And the one who won was the 140 grain Berger hybrid. Again, that met our requirement. It may not meet yours for what you're needing. But if we would not have been able to fit that long bullet in the 260 Remington casing, so that's why we went with 6.5 Creedmoor. Doesn't mean it's better, it's just different, all right, for our purposes. But if you look at a 308, again, 6.5 Creedmoor, 260 Remington, 308. 3 different projectiles, 3 different calibers, all fit into the magazine of a 308. So what that means is that if you're currently shooting 308 and you want to go to 6.5 Creedmoor or 260 Remington, all you got to do is change the barrel. Same mag, same bolt, same everything. You change the barrel and the ballistics are much, much better. And I can show you later on, as we get deeper into this, why the ballistics are better, okay? So 300 Win Mag, 6.5 Creedmoor, 260 Remington, 308. And then this last one's a 5.56, and I just threw it out there for comparison, all right? 5.56 is a fantastic bullet for a lot of different reasons. And that current one right there with the green tip is a tungsten penetrator. It's designed to punch through, you know, corridors and engine blocks and stuff like that. And it punches through soft tissue very, very, it'll pinpoint through soft tissue, which is not exactly what you want, but I just put it up there for comparison. All right, let's talk about some other equipment. At the end of this, or when we get a couple of episodes in, I'm gonna go to Ready Gunner, I'm gonna look at what you could buy that's not gonna break the bank. Something like a Ruger 6.5 with an optic, you know, maybe a $1,200 gun with a $800 scope or a $1,200 scope and a bipod that'll get you up and running without breaking the bank, because this stuff can get very, very, very expensive and it's very addictive. All right, so one of the things you're absolutely going to need once you get into this is a ballistic calculator. And we're going to cover this in depth later on, and you will see how essential it is later on. This thing has replaced every data book we used to have, where we used to write down every shot and log everything we did. This has completely changed the game. And you know, the phrase game changer is so overused, especially in the equipment world, that I don't use it lightly. And this is probably one of the only ones I've ever seen. This thing has absolutely changed the game in long range shooting, and it's fantastic. It's intimidating because people pick it up and it's got so many features that they get a little, but we're gonna go through it step by step by step and show you everything it has. When it comes to rangefinders, there's a lot of options out there and you don't need to break the bank. This is a Sig Kilo. It Bluetooths to the Kestrel, so it'll actually give you the range and your hold in mils or minutes of angle or whatever you want to, you set your Kestrel up to, that which is a kind of a cool feature. Now, rangefinders can go from $1,000 to, you know, $5,000, all right? If you look at a Plurf 25 Charlie, That's a military rangefinder. That's about $5,000. The reason is because it shoots on a light spectrum of 1550 nanometers, which cannot be seen with night vision goggles. All right. This shoots, I think, on 903 nanometers, which if I have night vision goggles, I can see that the beam go out and back, which is problematic for military, right? If I'm a military sniper and I'm using this and I'm lasing, you know, a soldier who has night vision goggles, he's going to see that energy on his kit or on his buddy's kit. So we don't use these. We use 1550 plus 25 Charlie, stuff like that. You don't need that. So look for a fairly inexpensive rangefinder. Be cautious of how far they say they'll work. So they'll say, oh, this is good to 1,500 meters. It depends on the reflectivity of the target. If I'm shooting a truck, I'm going to be able to reach out there at a mile or more because there's so much reflectivity on the side of that truck that it's going to bounce back really, really well. I don't think you're going to be shooting a truck, all right? You're going to be shooting an animal or a target, a small target with 10% reflectivity. So just be cautious about what they say on the box about how good these rangefinders are for. So one eye or two eyes, it depends on your application. A lot of people go with the dual eye rangefinders for hunting because they double as a pair of binos, and you can use it for glassing and spotting animals and stuff like that. So anytime anybody asks me, hey, what's the best this or that, I always say, what's your application? What are you going to use it for? And I'll try to guide you in the right direction. Really like this. It's small. I can stick it in my kit. It Bluetooths. It's very accurate, and it's very, very reliable. This is a Kestrel HUD. This Bluetooths to the Kestrel, and it mounts on the side of your rifle like that on the rail, and then pushes all your data to this. I can use it to run a countdown for a drill, for a competition, or I can use it with a range card, and I can see my data without coming off my optic and going to my Kestrel. It's mounted on my rifle like that, and as I'm shooting, I can just put my left eye up and see it. It's actually a pretty cool piece of kit, Kestrel HUD. All right, let's talk about optics. So tons and tons and tons of different optics out there, and you'll see you can buy an optic in Walmart for $100, or you can pay $5,000 for an optic. What's the difference? With optics, you generally get what you pay for, all right? And the big mistake I see people doing, they'll put a ton of money into their rifle and they'll buy a cheap piece of garbage optic, all right? Red flag, if your optic does not have a parallax knob, it's a piece of garbage and you need to buy something better. I've seen people come to long-range shooting classes with expensive guns and Walmart optics, all right? Don't do that. Now, some of the better models out there, Night Force, I have no affiliation with Night Force, but right now, they're top of the line. And that's from my experience in Force Mod, and that's from my experience as a user. That's purely my opinion. There are other good companies out there, and companies fluctuate. Schmidt & Benner used to be the top of the line. Don't know what happened internally in that company, but their quality dropped off. And when I talk about Night Force, I talk about quality of optics, quality assurance, and customer service, all right? Vortex are a fantastic company too, but you'll find that Vortex have really good stuff and really mediocre stuff. But Vortex have a lifetime warranty. So do your research, look at what your application is and what you're going to use it for, and then you can use these next 8 videos to educate yourself so you ask the right questions, all right? But generally all optics are built somewhat the same, okay? Especially good ones. So let's talk about it. One-piece mount or two-piece mounts. Completely up to you. There's pros and cons to each one. Like I said, SOCOM have done tests to see that these torque bolts are better than QD bolts, but I have used QD bolts in the military. I've taken my optic off my sniper rifle, I've bubble wrapped it and stuck it in my ruck. I've parachuted in because I can't leave my optic on my rifle, it'll break. I've landed, I've put my optic back on in the exact same place without adjusting anything. I've used a QD mount and I've tested my zero and it's maintained zero. So it's hard to argue with a lab in a controlled environment, but it is what it is. I think if you prefer a QD mount, they're fine. They make some people make some really good. LaRue makes some fantastic QD mounts. Okay, when you put these on, we're going to go through mounting a scope in detail, but make sure you torque it properly. When you mount it to the rifle, you push it all the way forward before you torque it down, and that stops the scope moving. All right, let's talk about from rear to front. Generally, they're all set up the same. At the rear of the scope, you're talking about ocular focus. This is what will focus your reticle, all right? So the problem is young people will get behind these optics, the reticle will be blurred, but their young eyes will fix it really, really quickly, all right? That's not what you want. You want to fix it manually yourself. So when you get behind it, look at something neutral that's not busy. The sky works really well. You look at the sky, and within a second or two, see if it's blurred. If it's blurred, come off it, adjust it, or have somebody adjust it for you, and then go back. Better or worse, better or worse, better or worse, until you get it perfectly crystal clear, and you're good. You don't have to adjust your reticle for shot to shot. So I'm shooting at a target 100 yards, and I'm shooting at a target 1,000 yards. Once your reticle's focused, you're good to go, all right? Once you come forward of the reticle focus, you will get the magnification. Again, they're all different. Some go from 5 to 25, 3.5 to 18, 7 to 35. When you set up your rifle and get your cheek to stock well and your eye relief, do it on max power, okay? Do it on max power. That way you're taking out scope shadow on max power, and when you go to lower powers, you'll be fine. But if you take out scope shadow, and we're going to talk about this more later, when you take out scope shadow at lower powers, you may go to higher powers and still have it in there, okay? But generally forward of your reticle focus is your magnification. All right, once we come forward, top knob, always elevation adjustment. Right knob, windage. Now we don't ever dial windage. It's a bad idea. Almost everybody I know, in every military I've ever heard of, has finally come around to holding for wind. We're going to talk about wind a lot later on, but don't ever dial for wind. Wind is too fluid, it moves too quickly, it changes too quickly. If you dial for wind, you're committed to that adjustment, and then when the wind completely switches direction, it's too hard to adjust on the fly. So we hold for wind, but we use the windage knob for zeroing. That's it, for lining up our bore and our reticle. On the left side, we have parallax adjustment. Parallax is putting the reticle and the target on the same focal plane, all right? So if you imagine, I hold up my finger like that. If I have, and like the wall behind you is the target, if I have parallax built in and I move my head slightly, my finger moves. Once I take parallax out, I'm putting that reticle on the same focal plane as the target, so it almost looks like my finger's against the wall, and as I move my head, my finger does not move. Extremely important, has to be adjusted for every single shot at different ranges, and underappreciated problem. You'll see people zeroing, and they'll jump around a lot because their gun's not set up properly, and they have parallax induced, and they haven't taken it out. We're going to talk about parallax a lot because it's so important. You will see on a lot of these scopes, they have ranges on the parallax knob. And people will go, okay, I'm going to 400 meters, let me set my parallax for 400 meters and shoot. Does it work? Never seen it work. It's a gimmick, don't believe it, okay? Fix your parallax every single time, and we'll talk about how to do that. So elevation, windage, parallax. Let's talk about what happens when I dial elevation. So let's say my scope's mounted, it's perfectly level. I zero at 100 yards and I'm hitting crosshairs. Now I go to 1,000 yard shot and I dial 1,000 yards on my, whatever that is in mils or minutes of angle or BDC, whatever, right? I dial 1,000 yards on my reticle. What that does internally in the tube, it pushes the reticle down in the tube. Now I get to the target, I've got to elevate the scope to get the crosshairs back on target, okay? So, I'll show you on this one. So I'm going to 1,000 yard shot, I dial 1,000 yards, I get on target. Now, because it pushed the reticle down, I have to elevate the gun to get the reticle back on target, which changes the angle of departure. Imagine I'm throwing a football to you, and people always laugh when I say I never threw a football in my life, but you know the concept. So I'm throwing a football, I don't throw it straight, right? Because gravity will drop it as soon as I do. Well, it's the same with a bullet. As soon as I launch that bullet, gravity is dropping it to the ground. So I have to elevate it and throw it high in the air so it falls down at longer range. When I dial 1,000 yards on the target, it pushes the reticle down, forces me to elevate the rifle, changes the angle of departure of the bullet, compensates for gravity at longer range. That's what's going on internally in the optic. It's the same thing when I'm doing windage. I'm moving the reticle left or right, which forces me to pull the gun back to the opposite side to get back on target. All right? That's about it for the optic. Clarity of glass, you get what you pay for generally. Some scopes I think are inflated and they're kind of proud of what they put out. Look for a good company with a good reputation that has a good warranty, because scopes do break. All right? I'm a firm believer in etched reticles, and we're going to talk about that here in a few minutes. Last thing, chronograph. So we will find out later on that it is extremely important to know exactly what the muzzle velocity of your rifle is. There's a bunch of different chronographs out there. We used to shoot the ones they had to shoot through, and people shot them all the time. Then this is a magneto speed. It's a bayonet style. It's a bayonet style that mounts underneath the barrel, like so. And then spacers come in. Once the bullet launches, it measures the speed of the bullet. You put that into your ballistic calculator with all your other parameters, and it will give you really, really accurate data all the way out to long range. We're going to talk about that a lot in the future, okay? Magneto speed, kind of inexpensive, kind of a little finicky, because if I have a class of 12 students and I'm trying to chronograph all their guns, then I have to mount and dismount this every time. And you'll run into problems like this, where it's hard to mount it because the barrel's recessed too far. They have a new adapter that mounts to a rail that makes it easier. So I bought a lab radar, which I don't have right now. It sits and you don't attach anything and you shoot it. Honestly, I found it to be a pain in the ass. It was about $600 and I don't use it. I use this on classes because I could put this on and take it off and make it work much, much quicker than the lab radar. Lab radar's great. You put it out, you shoot, but sometimes you're like, okay, move it an inch to the right, shoot, nothing. An inch to the left, nothing. Up, down, left, right, over here. Okay, now it works. And now I got to do it every single time for every single gun for students. I know where to put my guns to make it work, but for students, I don't bother. I use this. It's older, it's much less expensive, but it does work. And there's other ways to find muzzle velocity without a chronograph, and we'll talk about that a little later on. Okay, if I missed something on the subject of equipment, hit me up in the comments and I'll try and roll it into the second part. All right, let's talk about reticles. So something you're going to need eventually is a spotting scope. All right, now, there are ways to shoot without a spotting scope, but once you're learning and you have somebody behind glass that knows what they're doing, it can be hugely beneficial to help you get better. All right, now there's a lot of spotting scopes on the market. Some of them are super expensive. You need a spotting scope that has a reticle in it. That way, when a round goes, 2 mils off to the right, 2 mils off to the left, you can actually measure your correction back instead of going, hey, come a little bit to the left, all right, or a wee bit left. That's not a measurement, all right? So I've looked at a bunch. I've tried to buy a few for the company. And after being in the military my whole life and getting stuff for free, not to keep, but to use, and getting high-end stuff, I was shocked at how much spotting scopes were. The best spotting scope I've ever used in my life was a Zeiss Spotter 45 or Spotter 60. Absolutely fantastic piece of glass, has an etched reticle in it. Watching trace is like watching a rocket going down range with that thing. So, but it's extremely expensive and out of the price range for most people, including me. Bought a couple of Bushnells for the company, pretty happy with those. The last one I got was this one, which is made by Sightmark. You can go to their website. It's a pretty decent optic at a pretty reasonable price. Okay, it's 20 on the low end, 60 on the high end. It's got a reticle in it to help you adjust. And under the same kind of umbrella of companies, the tripod comes from Kopf-Jaeger, which it's a little heavy, but it's pretty sturdy. You'll want your tripod to have a little bit of weight in it, because on a windy day, it's going to shake that spot and scope like crazy. So I'm going to show you how to set this up later on. I'm going to show you how to get directly behind the gun target line. I'm going to show you how to be a better spotter, adjust rounds. I'm going to show you how to shoot with two shooters instead of one shooter and one spotter. And but a lot of spot and scopes on the market. Some of them are extremely expensive. I would say look at something mid-range. If you're paying more than $1,000 for a spot and scope, you're probably paying too much for what you need. Okay, but you are going to need one eventually. Let's talk about first and second focal plane scopes, and then we're going to talk about reticles. A lot of people ask a lot of questions about first and second focal plane scopes. You'll hear it as first focal plane or front focal plane. So there are pros and cons to both. But for long range shooting, I always tell people to get a first focal plane scope. Now, what's the difference? With a first focal plane scope, the reticle is etched on the glass in front of the magnification knob. So what does that mean to you? That means when you power up and down, imagine I'm at 25 power and I come down to 5 power. That image that you're looking at is going to get further away. With a first focal plane scope, because the reticle's in front of the magnification knob, the reticle will always get smaller. Okay? I go from 5 power to 25 power. I start at 5 power and I start magnifying and bringing that image closer. The reticle stays the same size in relation to the target. Okay? The bad part about that is if I'm shooting at a very, very long range target and I power down so I can see my mills, then my reticle is going to get so small that I won't be able to see it. So I generally have to dial everything, okay? But again, first focal plane or front focal plane, if I look at a target at 100 yards and it measures 5 mils, so I measure it in the mils in the reticle and it measures 5 mils. If I go to a 1,000-yard target, and the same size target, I measure it, it's still going to measure 5 mils. It's going to be the same throughout. Now, with a second focal plane reticle, the reticle is etched behind the magnification knob. So the reticle stays the same size regardless of the magnification of the target, right? So I go to a 100-yard target and I have a big, very clear reticle. I go to a 1,000-yard target, I power in, and the reticle will stay big, okay? Which is an advantage, especially if you're dialing, because I can make a very finite reticle and it never changes size, okay? The problem comes when you have a BDC reticle, which we'll talk about in a second, a bullet drop compensator, and it's second focal plane. It's designed only to match up on full power. So I'm shooting a 1:6 second focal plane, and I have a BDC reticle, and I line up a target at 400 yards, and I put the 4 line on it. If I'm magnified at 6, it's going to work. If I'm at 4 power, it's not going to line up anymore because the reticle is a different size. All right. So first focal plane, always better for long range shooting. Now the advantage of this is a Vortex Razor HD. And it's a 1:6 with a BDC reticle in it, but it's second focal plane. The reason it's second focal plane, it gives you a much bigger eye box on the back. When you go to 1 power and you want to clear a room, you go to 6 power, you go to the roof, you go to full power. Second focal plane reticle gives you a better eye box. So that's the advantage, all right? But that's the only time I would go with it. Always go with a first focal plane reticle or a front focal plane reticle for long range shooting. I hope that's clear as mud. All right, let's talk about reticles.